All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Every now and then we like to kind of shift gears a little bit,
Yeah.
and take a look at something that's maybe a little bit off the beaten path.
I was going to say a little spooky, a little
Yeah, a little spooky.
occult.
Occult.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so this is Occult Archives. That's what we're calling this little mini series, if you will.
I like it.
And it's really all about those books that have kind of gathered that a little bit of a reputation over the years.
Mm-hmm.
The feared books, the ones that people whisper about, the ones that you're not really supposed to read.
All right.
We're going to read them.
We're going to dive right in.
We're going to dive right in. So, but we're going to do it in a smart way.
Yeah.
And we're gonna try to have a little bit of fun with it.
Keep it light.
Yeah, keep it light. We're not going to get too bogged down.
Right.
So today we're going to be talking about Lily Adams Beck's The Way of Power: Studies in the Occult.
Mm-hmm.
This was published in 1928, and Beck also went by the pen name E. Barrington. So you might know her from that.
Mm.
Now, Beck had this interesting kind of way of looking at the world. She talked about our everyday reality, kind of as the mirror of the passing show.
Okay.
But she was always fascinated by this idea that there's something else going on behind that, like another layer of reality.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff that we don't immediately perceive.
Right. And she was skeptical at first, right? So that makes her journey all the more interesting.
Yeah.
She kind of compared people who were totally into the material world with those who said they had these deeper insights, like psychics and mystics and stuff.
Yeah. So our mission here, I guess you could say, is to really follow Beck's journey, her intellectual journey. We want to see how she went from kind of doubting this stuff to really investigating the nature of power, not just like political power, but like a deeper, more fundamental power.
Right. Like the power of consciousness.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And a big part of that is her exposure to Eastern thought, especially Indian philosophy.
Exactly. She really brings together that Western curiosity and those Eastern teachings on consciousness and these bigger questions.
Yeah. So in the first chapter, the preface, Beck talks about this really weird experience she had at a Western occult gathering. It wasn't very impressive. She was kind of turned off by the whole semi-religious vibe of it. But even though she was disappointed, she couldn't shake this idea that there's something to this concept of power. Like maybe there's this untapped potential out there, something we don't quite understand yet.
Yeah. So even when she's, not buying it, she's still curious.
Yep. Right. And then there's this key moment where she describes stumbling upon books about Asian thought, especially Indian thought.
Mm.
And she even questions this idea of stumbling, like, does one ever stumble? Or is everything that happens to us the direct result of our own actions and thoughts?
Wow. That's a big question.
Yeah.
It kind of goes against this idea of randomness, right? Like everything's connected to who we are and what we've done.
Right. And what really blew her mind was realizing that, like, a whole civilization, India, had made this other world, as she calls it, their main focus.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were more interested in that than in what we see as everyday reality.
Right. They saw the world behind the looking glass, as she calls it, as more real than the material world, the mirror of the passing show.
Exactly. And that's where her idea of the occult starts to shift. These Indian texts were suggesting that the occult might actually have laws, like a system that can be studied and understood. Like it's not just supernatural chaos.
Okay, so it's more like discovering a new set of rules, right?
Yeah. And to illustrate this, she tells this fascinating story about a naval captain in Bombay who saw this Hindu guy seemingly controlling water in a brass vessel.
Wait, like making it move around?
Yeah, like making it rise and move at his command. And get this, the vessel was empty. Like there was no water in it to begin with.
So how could that even?
I know, right?
Yeah.
And this wasn't like some, shady back alley thing. This
Yeah.
was broad daylight, multiple witnesses, a naval captain, not exactly the type to be easily fooled.
Right.
So Beck's like, okay, what if it was mass hypnotism? But what about the empty jar? This event really gets her wheels turning.
Yeah, it's like a challenge to her, right? To figure out what's really going on.
Totally. And from then on, she's determined to figure this stuff out. She wants to gather evidence, experience things for herself. But she's also like super wary of being tricked or misinterpreting things.
Makes sense. I mean, you got to be careful with this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. And she's adamant about staying grounded, living a healthy, normal life while she's doing this research. No getting lost in fanaticism or believing everything she hears, just sticking to the facts.
It's like a scientist, right?
Yeah.
Having that objective approach.
Exactly. She even compares it to, like, studying geometry. It might seem abstract at first, but they can reveal these profound truths about space and shapes. She sees her occult investigations in the same way, like a system that can unlock a deeper understanding of reality.
I like that analogy. It kind of takes away the spookiness of it, you know?
Yeah. And she had this intuition, even early on, that even small, seemingly insignificant psychic abilities could point to something much bigger and more surprising. Like, think about how magnetism was initially seen and how it eventually led to this whole new understanding of physics.
Yeah, yeah, like the tip of the iceberg, right?
Exactly. Now, in Chapter 2, the necessity of a healthy instrument, she talks about how important it is to have a healthy body and a clear mind when you're studying this stuff, even more so than in everyday life.
Okay, why is that?
Because she's saying that this strange world, this world behind the looking glass, is actually part of us. It's just that we've forgotten how to access it. Like, she uses this analogy of a long-lost heir returning to his kingdom and finding all the royal symbols, like the scepter, totally unfamiliar and weird.
So it's like we're strangers in our own inner world.
Yeah, and that's why people who say they've seen this stuff, glimpsed beyond the veil, they're often seen as crazy. Because the values of that real world, as she calls it, can be so different from our everyday perceptions. What's important there might seem trivial here, and vice versa.
So it's not that they're insane, it's just that they're seeing things from a different perspective, right?
Right. But she also makes it clear that you don't have to be unbalanced to be a pioneer in these realms. She points to the Buddha as the prime example, perfectly sane, clear mind, but also with these profound psychic experiences.
Yeah, the Buddha's a good example. He was known for his wisdom and clear thinking, not for being, out there.
Exactly. And she highlights how he deliberately chose the middle path, avoiding extremes of luxury and self-denial, so that his body could cooperate with his spirit.
It's all about balance, right?
Right. And from that, she explains this Buddhist principle that psychic abilities are attainable by anyone who follows the right path. They emerge naturally, like breathing, but they have to be used wisely and cautiously.
So not just for showing off or personal gain.
Exactly. And she tells this great Indian parable about a prisoner in a tower who escapes by using a beetle, a silk thread, and some honey. It's this beautiful metaphor for how small, consistent actions can lead to big achievements, especially when it comes to developing psychic abilities.
That's a cool story. It kind of reminds me of like the power of habit,
Yeah, totally. And she points out that in Asia, this disciplined way of living isn't seen as a restriction, it's seen as a virtue, something that opens doors.
Interesting. So it's not about deprivation, it's about like refinement.
Yeah. And this made her understand why so many religions teach things like abstinence, temperance, fasting, not just as rules, but as tools to loosen the grip of the physical world and maybe access that real world behind the looking glass.
Okay, so those practices aren't just about being good, they're about changing your consciousness.
Right. And she even noticed this in her own life, how increasing her inner force made public speaking easier for her, even without preparation, like a kind of independence from her conscious thought process.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So her big takeaway from this chapter is that the occult is really just an extension of our known powers. And to develop them, you need focused action, concentration, solitude, discipline, willpower, all that good stuff, not just talking about it.
Makes sense. You can't just, wish for these abilities. You got to work at it.
Right. Now, Chapter 5, the illusion of separation and the nature of dreams. It's really interesting. She talks about this profound experience she had with grief and how she got this unexpected answer, like an inner voice telling her that all grief is self-pity and that in the real world, there's no distance, just states of mind, like everything is here and now.
Whoa, that's deep.
I know, right? And this leads her to explore the Indian concept of 3 states of consciousness related to sleep: waking, dreaming, which they call subtle, and deep sleep, which is pure consciousness. They say deep sleep can bring these dreams that are hard to put into words, but connect us to our eternal self.
So even when we're sleeping, there's a deeper part of us that's still awake, still learning.
Yeah. And she explains how these subtle states can both block out our senses and liberate our subconscious mind, which is like the huge underwater part of an iceberg.
Okay, that's a good image. It's like most of our mind is hidden from us, right?
Right. And she talks about the possibility of remembering past lives in these states. and these educative dreams that can reveal stuff about our own development.
So dreams can be like teachers.
Yeah, but she also warns against getting too attached to the dream world, to the point where it overshadows your waking life. Like, it can become a psychic narcotic.
Yeah, you got to stay grounded, right?
Right. And then she gets into this wild idea of fusing dreams, where different personalities can meet in the dream state, creating this shared dual life. She sees it as a foreshadowing of deeper communication in the future, especially between people who are close.
So like a merging of minds.
Yeah, kinda. And she even shares a dream she had where she was in two places at once, merging without overlapping, which shows the weird logic of that real world, where places are more like states of mind.
It's like that saying, wherever you go, there you are, right?
Exactly. And she thinks it's foolish to try and control your dreams. The real value, she says, is in letting go of that control, letting your subconscious mind do its thing.
So it's more about like surrendering to the experience, right?
Right. And she encourages people to try and connect with their hidden self in dreams, to enter that real world through what she calls the opener of the gates, which is deep, peaceful sleep.
Okay, so sleep can be more than just rest. It can be like a portal.
Yeah. And she points out that the ancient Greeks and Romans believed in the healing power of dreams, even having a whole college dedicated to them.
Wow, they were really onto something, huh?
Yeah. She even connects this to a saying attributed to Christ: when the outside becomes the inside, then the kingdom of heaven has come. Like merging our external and internal selves to get a glimpse of immortality.
It's about integrating all parts of ourselves. So.
Exactly. And then she brings in Professor James and his ideas about other forms of consciousness beyond our normal working state, separated only by the filmiest of screens.
So there are other ways of perceiving reality that are right there, just waiting to be accessed.
Right. And she compares that to St. Paul's experience of being caught up into the third heaven and hearing things he couldn't describe.
It's like trying to explain a dream, right? It makes sense in the dream, but when you try to put it into words, it just sounds weird.
Totally. She keeps emphasizing that India has a wealth of knowledge about these states of consciousness and their powers, but she also warns about the dangers of exploring them without guidance.
Yeah, you got to be careful with that stuff. It's not just about having fun. It can be dangerous.
Right. And she tells this story about a character who talks about a primal energy, like a sword, and the rules of detachment. You need to navigate this realm safely.
Okay, so it's like there's a power there, but you got to know how to handle it.
Yeah. And she ends the chapter by saying that what you encounter in this world behind the looking glass reflects your own inner state. Like, with a thought you may be in the horror of the desolate country, with another in the shining land. She's basically saying, be careful what you wish for.
It's like your inner world shapes your outer experience, right?
Exactly. Now, in Chapter 6, Witness Phenomena, the Case of Jacolia, she focuses on these documented accounts of occult stuff observed by people she considers credible.
So like eyewitnesses.
Yeah. And the main guy she focuses on is this guy named Louis Jacolio, who was the Chief Justice of Chandranagore in French India, like 60 years before she wrote the book.
Okay, a chief justice, so not some random guy off the street.
Right. He was there for a long time, interested in religion, especially the Kabbalah and how it relates to Brahmin teachings. And he described himself as an impartial observer, just recording what he saw.
So not a true believer, but not a skeptic either, just like neutral.
Exactly. He even said that when he saw these magnetic and spiritual facts, he could only explain them as hallucinations unless he was willing to admit that the occult was real.
So he was struggling to reconcile what he saw with his own understanding of the world, right?
Yeah. And she mentions this warning the Brahmins gave their initiates. Learn that this is a mystery which should never be revealed to the vulgar herd, otherwise great harm may befall you. Like they knew this stuff was powerful and potentially dangerous if misused.
That's kind of creepy, but also makes sense.
Yeah. And she touches on Jacoliot's comparisons between Zoroastrianism, the Kabbalah, and Brahmin texts, noting how Brahmins believe these powers often come from ancestral spirits. Then she outlines the 3 levels of initiation in Brahmin teachings. For the boy, the householder, and the ascetic seeking higher powers, all linked to the hidden wisdom of the Vedas.
So it's like a gradual path, right? You start with the basics and then move deeper as you progress.
Exactly. But here's the really cool part. Jacolia describes his experiences in Pondicherry with a fakir, like a holy man.
Yeah.
He saw the fakir stop a clock just by concentrating on it.
Seriously, just like stopped it with his mind.
Yeah. And then Jacolia tried to mentally influence the spelling of a dead person's name that the fakir was trying to evoke. He managed to change the first name, but not the city, which made him think that maybe the fakir was reading his mind.
Wow, that's wild, like some kind of psychic battle going on there.
Right. And then the fakir did this whole other set of crazy stuff. Made one side of a scale go down with just a feather, while the other side had like 170 pounds. Made a flower crown float, filled the room with weird sounds, even produced a shadowy hand that drew luminous figures.
Okay, now that's just showing off.
I know, right? And Joliet was skeptical of some of it, but he was really meticulous about testing the more physical phenomena.
So he was trying to be objective, not just believing everything he saw.
Right. And in the end, he was convinced that there are these huge unknown forces in nature and in us, and that eventually science will catch up and figure them out. He even thought that the ego force itself might be one of the most powerful forces out there.
Hmm. That's interesting. So it's not just about these mystical energies, it's about our own inner power, too.
Exactly. And he compared the skepticism towards these occult phenomena to the initial disbelief people had towards the telegraph. Like, that's impossible.
Yeah, now we can't imagine life without it.
Right. So Joliet kept observing these things in India, including meeting this extraordinary fakir named Govinda Swami in Benares. They met in Joliet's apartment overlooking the Ganges, with a waterspout swirling outside. And Joliet straight up asked him, "Do you feel any power developing or any changes in your brain or muscles during these performances?"
Okay, that's the question I'd want to ask, too. Like, what's it actually like to do these things?
Yeah. And that's where she leaves us hanging for now.
Yeah.
But moving on to Chapter 7, Hypnotism and the East-West Divide, Beck delves into the connection between hypnotism and the occult.
Okay, so hypnotism, like putting people in a trance.
Yeah. She points out that hypnotism used to be considered a cult, but now it's kind of accepted by science, at least partially. And she thinks that all true occult phenomena are on their way to becoming scientifically recognized.
So it's just a matter of time before science catches up.
Right. But she also criticizes modern science for being ignorant about a lot of important stuff, and predicts that future science will be more focused on consciousness than just our senses.
Yeah, it's like science is still catching up on how the mind really works, right?
Exactly. And she talks about hypnotism because anything that quiets the reasoning mind, what she calls the objective guardian of the ego, can be a gateway to the land behind the looking glass.
Okay, so like bypassing the conscious mind to access something deeper.
Right. And she points out this key difference between Western and Eastern approaches to hypnotism. Western hypnotists tend to impose their will on the subject, using them to achieve specific results.
So it's more about control, right?
Yeah. But Eastern adepts, she says, they try to put the objective self to sleep, freeing the subject's higher consciousness to have its own experiences. They say things like, "I loose you, go."
So it's more about like unlocking the person's own potential.
Exactly. And she thinks this Eastern approach can lead to much more interesting and unexpected results, even though it's still limited by the person's development.
So it's not just about the technique, it's about the inner state of the person, too.
Right. And she even touches on self-hypnosis, saying it might be common in some forms of yoga, often with predictable outcomes. And she even throws out this theory that some crimes in the West might be due to self-hypnosis, either conscious or unconscious.
Whoa, that's a bold claim.
Yeah. And then she talks about how our love for opiates in the East and alcohol in the West might come from this subconscious desire to escape our senses and reach a realm of pleasure.
So we're all looking for a way to transcend reality, in a way.
Yeah. But she contrasts the drunkard's paradise with the more profound and visionary effects of opium and hashish, like in De Quincey's writings.
Yeah, some drugs seem to take you deeper than others, right?
Right. She even mentions the potential for visions and strange phenomena under the influence of Keras, noting that experienced people can tell the difference between real stuff and drug-induced illusions. She also suggests that smoking tobacco might be popular because it dulls the objective self a little bit, inducing a kind of waking dream state.
It's like a mini escape from reality, right?
Yeah. And then she brings back Professor James and his varieties of religious experience, talking about how narcosis can sometimes produce brief flashes of mystical experience.
So even drugs can, like, accidentally open up those doors of perception.
Yeah, but she's clear that those glimpses aren't the true path. She quotes James on nitrous oxide and ether, how they can stimulate mystic consciousness and reveal profound truths, but those truths fade when you sober up.
It's like a tease, right? Showing you what's possible, but then snatching it away.
Yeah. But those experiences often leave behind a sense of meaning, like a lingering afterglow. And she agrees with James that nitrous oxide trances might be a means of revelation for people at a certain stage of development. She even summarizes his conclusion that these experiences often converge towards a unifying insight, where the opposites of the world melt into unity, suggesting a deeper metaphysical meaning.
So it's like it's pointing you towards this underlying oneness of everything, right?
Exactly. And she thinks that our true self might be liberated in this way sometimes, and that the remnants of these experiences might seem like nonsense because they follow a different logic than our everyday world.
Yeah, like trying to describe a dream to someone who wasn't there.
Right. She even shares a personal anecdote about having a dream full of beauty that only left behind a weird, meaningless phrase when she woke up. But later, life events made that phrase suddenly make sense.
So it's like those experiences can have hidden meanings that are revealed over time.
Yeah. And then she mentions this guy named Clark, who, under narcosis, experienced time as the eternal now of Indian yoga.
Wow. So he was tapping into that timeless dimension.
Yeah. Now, in Chapter 8, Dangers in the True Path, she starts by saying that those fleeting glimpses of truth you get from narcosis aren't the real deal, even though they might coincide with clairvoyance or prophecy or other weird stuff.
So it's a shortcut, but not the real path.
Right. And she's very clear that messing with your body to force those glimpses is dangerous, both physically and in other ways.
Yeah, there's a reason why they call them drugs, right?
Yeah. And then she asked this big question. How can people living ordinary Western lives, with all their distractions and demands, ever hope to see the formless, the beautiful, the utterly desirable that Eastern sages talk about?
It's a valid question. Like, how do you balance that inner work with everyday life?
Right. And she says that the true path isn't about forcing anything. It's about uniting the best, highest, and simplest aspects of ourselves, body, mind, and psyche. This is where yoga comes in.
So it's about harmony, about bringing everything together.
Exactly. And she quotes one of her earlier articles saying that true wisdom is found in small beginnings, in a certain personal austerity and circumspectness. In the East, they call it recollectedness.
Okay, so it's not about being extreme. It's about being mindful and focused.
Right. And she connects this to the teachings of great faiths that emphasize self-discipline as a gateway to the eternal way.
It's a common thread, right? This idea of self-mastery as the key to unlocking your potential.
Yeah. And she argues that trying to force ourselves to fit into some external mold is often the problem, whereas wise asceticism, letting go of unnecessary burdens, is actually an invitation to joy.
So it's not about deprivation, it's about freedom, right?
Exactly. And she reminds us that wise people throughout history have taught that self-discipline is the key to mastering your own fate. She quotes Mengzu. That in which men differ from beasts is a thing very inconsiderable. The wise are wise because they preserve it carefully.
So it's about cultivating that higher part of ourselves that sets us apart.
Right. And she quotes Freud on the Roman Stoics, who emphasized plain living, minimizing needs, and finding happiness in intellectual and moral action, not just sensual gratification. She sees that as the true path to the occult, beyond sensory illusions.
So it's not about indulging in pleasures, it's about finding a deeper kind of satisfaction.
Exactly. And she acknowledges that there might be other paths, but this is the safe and reliable one, marked on the spiritual maps of all the great faiths.
It's reassuring, right, to know that there's a common ground, a shared wisdom across traditions.
Yeah. And she ends this chapter by saying that this kind of disciplined individual is the only hope for humanity to evolve and inherit the universe, because we need that higher consciousness to overcome our limitations.
So it's not just about personal growth, it's about the evolution of our whole species.
Right. And then she leaves us with this question.
Mhm.
Are our modern cities, with all their distractions and temptations, really conducive to developing this kind of individual?
It's a good question. Like, are we moving towards that higher potential, or are we getting bogged down in the material world?
Right. Now, Chapter 12, Love as the Basis of the Law, gets to the heart of a lot of mystical teachings. She says there's a consensus among those who have seen into the occult. Love is the fundamental law of the universe.
So love isn't just an emotion, it's like a cosmic principle.
Exactly. But she acknowledges that life's hardships can make it hard to believe in that. She asks, why should love be the key to realizing powers? Why does St. Paul say we need to be rooted and grounded in love to grasp the divine?
Yeah, those are good questions. Like, how does love translate into spiritual power?
Right. And she goes back to India, quoting Max Muller on how religion and philosophy were so central to the Indian mind, how the invisible real was paramount for them.
So they were really focused on the inner world, the spiritual dimension.
Yeah, and she sees this focus as the highest point of human achievement, reminding us that those Indian thinkers shared a common ancestry with Europeans.
It's like we all have that potential within us, regardless of culture or background.
Exactly. And she makes this bold statement, India's teaching of the unity of the universe and our oneness with it is the true teaching of the occult.
So it's not about separation, it's about connection, about realizing that we're all part of this one big thing.
Right. And she describes the Indian view of the ego as the creator of ignorance and illusion, blinding us to the true nature of reality because it relies on our fallible senses and is trapped in time and space.
So the ego is like a veil, preventing us from seeing clearly.
Yeah. And she talks about this true self hidden beneath the ignorant, false, and ape-like self. This true self is part of God, she says, but we've forgotten it, like a king who's been dethroned.
It's like we've forgotten our true nature, our true potential.
Right. And she says that until we recognize this true self, we're just stumbling around in a world of false concepts, misunderstanding our place in the universe. Realizing this truth is enlightenment, she says, opening our eyes to see the world as it really is, perfect and part of us.
So enlightenment is not some far-off goal, it's a shift in perception, a way of seeing things differently.
Exactly. And she says that the illusion of individuality, focusing on our own personal desires, is what keeps us from our power. She uses Edward Carpenter's analogy of leaves on a tree, each thinking it's separate, but all nourished by the same sap.
It's a good image, we're all connected, all part of the same life force.
Right. And she contrasts the Western idea of original sin with the Indian concept of original power. We're not inherently flawed, she's saying, we've just forgotten our true royal nature.
So it's not about redemption, it's about remembering who we really are.
Exactly. And she quotes this powerful statement from an Indian text. I, man though I be, I myself am the unchanging. I sit victorious above pain and change, for I too am divine. I too am fathered by the starry sky. What I will, I can do and be. Death has no power on that immortal self.
Wow, that's powerful. It's like a declaration of our inherent power and divinity.
Yeah. And she explains that becoming aware of this true self is a gradual process, like evolving from a primitive hominid to a god. It takes time and experience to uncover that pearl of great price hidden within the ego.
So it's a journey, a process of growth and evolution.
Right. And she concludes that we'll keep coming back to life, to this school, until we achieve that self-realization, piercing through personality to reach our divine core. She even quotes St. Paul about the earnest expectation of the creature waiteth for the manifestation of the sons of God, interpreting it as the evolution of superconsciousness.
It's like we're all on this path, all striving towards that higher potential.
Right, and she points out that everything is at a different stage of evolution, experiencing the consequences of its actions. There's no wrath or pardon, she says, just the law of cause and effect. You fall, you got to climb back up.
It's like the universe is fair, but it's also tough.
Yeah. Now in chapter 13, Knowledge, Will, and the Yoga Paths, she introduces this idea that the highest intellect can become a lord of Maya, seeing through the illusions of the senses to perceive the truth. And she uses the Buddha as the ultimate example of this kind of yoga, the yoga of pure intellect.
So your mind can be a tool for liberation, not just for thinking about everyday stuff.
Exactly. She talks about how the Buddha tried and rejected the harsh asceticism of Raja Yoga, finding a different path that suited his powerful intellect.
It's like there's no one-size-fits-all approach, right? You got to find what works for you.
Right. And she emphasizes the intense thinking and contemplation the Buddha went through under the Bodhi tree, which led to his enlightenment and the realization of truth. He attained powers, she says, but considered them relatively unimportant.
So knowledge and understanding were more important to him than, like, psychic tricks.
Yeah. And she admits that few people can follow the Buddha's path exactly, but his insight makes it easier for other intellectuals, like philosophers and scientists, to find their way to that land behind the looking glass.
It's like he blazed a trail for them to follow.
Right. And she explains how those intellectuals will eventually see through the illusion of individuality, realizing that it's just a distortion. They'll perceive the body as a constantly changing thing, the mind as a swirling whirlpool of thoughts.